All right, let's talk about something you experience every single second of your life, but probably never really notice: time itself. Because it turns out that your perception of now is one of the most incredible illusions your mind ever creates. So check this out. This ruler, it represents the distance that light travels in 1 billionth of a second. That's unbelievably fast. But it also means that if I hold my hand up just this far from my eyes, I'm not actually seeing it as it is right now. I'm seeing my hand as it was a billionth of a second in the past. And that, right there, is the core of the temporal illusion. You see, because both light and the nerve signals from your senses take time to get processed by your brain, you are never, and I mean never, experiencing the present moment. You're always living in the immediate past. What you perceive as now is really just a high-speed memory of what just happened. Okay, so if we're always lagging a little bit behind reality, how do we do anything? How do we catch a ball, drive a car, or even just have a normal conversation? Well, it turns out our brain has this really clever and honestly slightly unsettling solution. Your brain basically acts like a prediction processor. It's constantly guessing, constantly making a hypothesis about what's going to happen in the next fraction of a second, just so you don't feel the delay. It literally confabulates. It makes up the details to stitch everything together into a smooth, continuous reality. The now that you're feeling, it's really just your brain's best guess of what the present should be. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting, because this mental construction of now doesn't just keep us feeling up to date, it also makes our personal experience of time incredibly, well, elastic. It's totally subjective. And you've definitely felt this before, right? It's called the holiday paradox. You go on an amazing week-long trip, and the whole thing seems to just vanish in an instant. But then, when you look back on it, that 1 week feels like this huge, significant chunk of your life. How is that even possible? Well, it's because we actually have two completely different ways of perceiving time. First, you've got perspective timing. That's how time feels as it's happening. Think about a boring flight delay. It feels like it's dragging on forever. But then there's retrospective timing. That's how we remember it. That same endless delay. In your memory, it's just a tiny blip. But that exciting day of sightseeing that flew by, that feels like it took up a huge part of the trip. So here's the crazy rule at the heart of all of this. Our perception and our memory are playing by two totally opposite rule books. When your day is jam-packed with new, exciting experiences, time flies by in the moment, but it feels really long and rich in your memory. And when your time is empty and monotonous, it feels agonizingly slow as it's happening, but your memory barely even logs it. It's like it never happened. So let's zoom out. Let's go from a single vacation to an entire lifetime. Because this whole principle of novelty, it's the key to answering one of the most universal questions we all ask. You know exactly what I'm talking about. When you were a kid, a single summer felt like an eternity. But now, entire years, maybe even whole decades, just seem to evaporate. Why does the river of time feel like it's flowing faster and faster? Now, the common explanation you hear is something called proportion theory. It makes sense mathematically. You know, when you're 10 years old, 1 year is a whopping 10% of your entire life. But when you're 50, a year is just a tiny 2%. It seems logical, right? But that's not the whole story. The deeper, neurological reason is the exact same one that explains the holiday paradox. It all comes down to a lack of novelty. So here's how it works inside your brain. The hippocampus is the part of your brain that creates new memories, and it absolutely thrives on new things. But as we get older, our lives tend to get, well, more routine. Same commute, same job, same meals. Your brain sees all this repetition and basically decides, this is just more of the same. It's not worth storing in long-term memory. So when you look back on a year or a decade, there are way fewer distinct memory bookmarks to separate the days. Your mind just compresses all that routine time, making a whole decade feel much shorter than it actually was. And get this mental architecture doesn't just warp our perception of our own lives, it fundamentally distorts how we understand the entire timeline of human history. Because our brains are so bad at grasping these vast stretches of time, we rely on mental shortcuts to place people and events. And this leads to some truly shocking chronological illusions. Okay, prepare to have your mental timeline completely scrambled. Marilyn Monroe, the timeless icon of old Hollywood, and Queen Elizabeth II, a monarch who felt completely modern for most of our lives, yeah, they were born in the same year. And how about this one? Martin Luther King Jr., the giant of the American Civil Rights Movement, and Anne Frank, the enduring voice of the Holocaust, same birth year. It's wild, right? Our minds anchor people to the era when they were famous, not when they were actually living, and it completely messes up our perception of history.
This is a perfect example of something called the chronocentric illusion. It's this deep-seated bias that makes us feel like the past was some distant, grainy, black and white movie, and that our now is the only one that's truly real, vivid, and in full color. But of course, that's just a trick of the mind.
So, where does all of this leave us? Well, when you put all of these pieces together, it leads to a really profound and, honestly, kind of beautiful understanding of our place in the universe. Once you break free from that chronocentric illusion, you can experience this feeling called chronosonder. It's that sudden, awe-inspiring realization that every single person who has ever lived, a Roman centurion, a medieval farmer, your own great-grandparents, they all lived in a now that felt just as real, just as immediate, and just as important as your now feels to you. I love this quote because it perfectly captures our fleeting but powerful role. We aren't permanent fixtures in the universe. We are all just ripple ghosts. We're temporary, incredibly complex patterns of matter. We are little disturbances that bring awareness and consciousness to an otherwise indifferent cosmos. And in our brief time here, we have this unique and pretty vital job. You could say we are the universe's autobiographers. As far as we know, we're the only part of it that observes and records and tries to make sense of itself. We give meaning to events that would otherwise just happen and be forgotten forever. So what do we do with this knowledge? If a life full of novelty creates rich memories but makes time feel fast, how can we slow things down? Well, the answer is totally counterintuitive. You have to let go. You have to be bored sometimes. Just sit and do nothing. You might not have the time of your life in that moment, but by actually feeling time pass, slowly and without distraction, you'll feel like you have more time in your life. And that really leaves us with one final thought. Think about it. Your collection of memories is the only real proof you will ever have that your life actually happened. It's the story you tell yourself about who you are. So, knowing that, what kind of story, what kind of evidence are you going to create for the future version of you to look back on?